me the story of Jesus. Write on my heart every word. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that ever was heard. Loving that story so tender, clearer than ever I see. Say, let me read what you whisper, love paid the ransom for me. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that ever was heard.
Okay, we're going to continue on our series on the topic of hell. I know everybody looks forward to that topic. You should, because if you're one of God's elect, you're not going there. So you're just going to peer in through the looking glass and hopefully be thankful that you're not going there at the end of the day. This is one of those things that we're saved from eternally. Last week, we looked at a few things. We didn't get very far, but we did look at a few things. Is this on? Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
All right. We looked at a couple of one thing in all of this that I want you to remember, and this is very important, especially when you run into folks that try to convince you that there isn't a hell because God wouldn't be just in having a hell. Remember that we have no idea what righteousness really looks like. We know from the scriptures that our own righteousnesses are as filthy rags. That there's not one of us that does righteousness. We've seen that in the doctrine of total depravity all over the place. Verse after verse after verse that teaches us we don't even comprehend what righteousness is. So why can we demand God to be equal with us? Maybe man's justice wouldn't send everyone to a devil's hell, but we don't know what God's righteousness even looks like. So let's remember, or try to remember, how holy and just He is, and understand that just for one sin, just one, that's all it takes, you will be consigned in hell forever if you're not one of His elect. You see, this is one of the reasons that He had to plan salvation the way He did in case there was going to be salvation. Because if He didn't, there'd be nothing left here. No one would have made it. Not even the first man. And something that Brother Walensky taught, we were talking yesterday that he brought up that I thought was really interesting. I think we all know this, but I don't know that we ever really sit around and think about it. Our adversary, the devil, I want you to remember that he possesses more intelligence than any of the other creatures that roam here on the earth. He was the highest. He's smarter than all of the rest of the angels. He's not a dumb guy. And yet sometimes we get this arrogant position that we think we can defeat him by ourselves. You're not going to defeat him by yourself. He's too smart for you. Way too smart for you. That's why we're told given some of the warnings that we're given in Scripture. When you take someone that is that evil, that has access to whisper in your ear from time to time, you have to be very wary of him, and that's why we stand on what the Bible says, because you can't tell otherwise. If you try to go with what man thinks, you're gonna snub your toe every time. We need to understand that. We need to understand that this creature that's out there called the devil, he's not a dummy. He's not a stupid man. They've proven that science has proven that if you possess a trait in your DNA, it had to come from somewhere before. So while we have people that have extremely high IQs, some of them approaching 200, I think genius hits at 180, we have some of those people out there. Do you realize that in order for there to be a 200 IQ, somebody in their line had to have a 201 IQ, and that would have been Adam. So if you take someone like the devil, who can talk Eve into eating a fruit and deceive her, you don't think he can deceive you? You think you're impervious to this? You are not. So don't think you are. Understand that we are handicapped. Every one of us is handicapped and walking around on a crutch. And the devil's over there trying to kick that bad foot out of the way every time he can. So understand that our adversary will come along and try to convince you that things like hell don't exist. And he can do a really good job of it if you don't stand on the scriptures. You have to stand on the Bible. Now, there's a verse I thought about this morning. It's not in the outline, but I did want to bring it up. It's Revelation chapter 5 and verse 9. It says, "And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book." This is when everyone's in heaven. This is at the end. "Take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain." Oh no, I'm sorry, this isn't. This is right at the ascension. Strike that first part. "They sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred, every tongue, and people, and nation." There will be representatives of every family in heaven. Now, how could that be possible if salvation is based on free will? Not every family that has ever lived had the opportunity to accept Christ as their personal Savior, did they? Look at all those people that lived in the Old Testament days before Christ even came to earth. Did they get the gospel? No. And yet the promise is that there will be someone of every family in heaven. Now, you might be the only one, or you might have the biggest family reunion that you've ever seen in your life. I don't know. But there's a promise there that someone from every family will be there, which negates the idea of some sort of work salvation, because if you have to work to get there and you don't know what the work is, you're not going to get there, and there's not going to be one of every family there. So remember that. That's just a minor point to think of as we consider this topic of hell and who it's really for and what's really going to happen. And one other thing, remember also that one of the arguments made against it is the idea that not everyone had a chance. That's not true. Everyone does have a chance. They will stand and be judged according to their works if they're not elect. And if they live a sinless life, they will enter into the pearly gates. The problem is, there aren't going to be any of those, because every one of us sins constantly. And again, when you think of the terms of how righteous God is, that the very best that we can do is altogether vanity, completely and totally worthless. Now look at what God must be. Look at where his righteousness must be, how high he must be compared to us that are just lowly little worms. The question is not, why did he only save so few? The question is, why did he save anybody at all? That's where the grace comes in, that he saved anybody, because he certainly didn't have to. But by the grace of God, we're just as wicked as anybody else out there in the world. We all have it within us. You know, think about this. Have you ever gotten mad at somebody and wished they were dead? Yeah. You know, well, Jesus said that if you look on a woman to lust after her, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So if you look at somebody to plan on killing them, in your heart, you've committed murder. You see, there are sins that we don't even realize that we do. And we do them all the time, day after day after day after day. And so try to think in terms of how high God is as we go through this, and understand that we don't have the right to hold him down and make him set his rules based on what our standards are. We have to find out what his standards are and try to live accordingly. Okay? Now, some of the things that we covered last week. We covered the definition of the word hell, the abode of the dead, the place of departed spirits, the infernal regions or lower world, regarded as a place of existence after death, the grave, infernal regions regarded as a place of torment, the abode of devils and condemned spirits, the place or state of punishment of the wicked after death. We looked at the Hebrew word Sheol, and we saw that it's translated in 3 different words. 31 times is translated hell, 30 times is translated grave, 3 times is translated pit, and we looked at some of those verses. We noted that in the New Testament, there are 3 Greek words that are translated hell: Gehenna, Hades, and Tartaro. All 3 of those are and I went over the point of homonyms and synonyms. You remember that last week, that we have words here. When you reminded me of another one, and that is when I was talking about the oak tree that's in the front yard. It has a trunk. Elephants have trunks. My car has a trunk. When we travel, Wendy's clothes go in a steamer trunk. So, you see, words can mean one word can have a whole bunch of different meanings to it. And none of those words are synonymous. The trunk of my car is not synonymous with the trunk of the tree. They're different things, even though they're spelled the same, they're pronounced the same. Those are called homonyms. So you can't justly take every place that grave is mentioned in the Scripture because it's translated from the word Sheol and decide that hell is nothing more than the grave. No, hell is hell, and the grave is the grave. All dead people go into the grave. Their body goes into the grave. Their spirit goes back to God who gave it and then to the appointed place. It either goes straight to hell or it goes to heaven, one or the other. Okay? So hell is one thing, graves are something else. Now I do understand there are times when the King James translators meshed them, but one verse does not a doctrine make, and you have to pay attention to everything that God said, not just 1 or 2 verses. And if we take the position that hell is nothing more than a grave, then the rich man and Lazarus was in torments. Are you in torments when they put you in the dirt? I guess if you're alive you are, but once you're dead, I don't think that's the case. So anyway, let's remember that. We also looked at some of the characteristics. That's where we're going to pick up this week, on some of the characteristics of hell, to show that it can't be the grave. It can't be that. It can't be annihilation. There are people that are there, that are conscious, that are suffering, that know that they're there. Hell is remember the definition, it's a temporary abode. It's a temporary place. Somewhere here in this planet, underneath us, is where hell is. This world is temporary. When Christ returns, he's going to destroy it. And we're told at the end of the book of Revelation that death and hell were both cast into the lake of fire. So hell is a temporary holding facility, if you will, for people that are going to end up in the lake of fire. The devil, his angels, and the wicked. So let's remember that also. You can't be annihilated in hell and then come back at the great white throne. That doesn't work. So let's remember that. So we looked at the fact that hell is located beneath the surface of the earth, that it's a place into which souls descend, and that as such it stands in contrast to heaven, which is above and to which men must ascend. Okay? And those words were used. We notice that hell is where the souls of the wicked go after the death of the body. That's where their souls and spirits go. And their flesh rots and goes back into the dirt. We notice that when death seizes upon the wicked, they go down into hell. Our verse there was Psalm 55:15. And that explains why death and hell are often linked together. Because if you're non-elect, when you die, you go to 2 places. Somebody stands over you and puts you into the ground here, and your spirit goes somewhere else. And so that's one of the reasons that death and hell are tied together in so many different places that we read in the Bible. And since it is the bodies of the wicked that go into the graves, it's their souls that are cast into hell. Okay, that's where we left off last week. So this week, I want you to turn to Isaiah chapter 14. We mentioned this in the definitions of the word Sheol, and that is that hell is a pit. And I believe we may have already looked at these verses. Let me check real quick. No, these are different. Okay. Chapter, Isaiah, where am I? Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 15 says, "Yet thou shalt be brought down," this is speaking to Lucifer, "thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." Hell is and you know what a pit is. It's a big open hole that you throw people in, or throw nickels in, or around here, if you try to dig a pit, you'll end up with a well. You don't get very far until you hit water. But if you go all the way into the center of the earth, you're going to find that would be a pit, wouldn't it? If somewhere there's an opening that goes right down to the middle of the earth, that would certainly be a pit. And there's an interesting thing, with the earth spinning the way it does, you realize that if you get all the way down to the middle, if you're in the middle of the earth, you realize you're going to be moving, spinning circular like a top. Watch a top sometime. When you take one of those little tops that kids have with the string and fling it out, if you're any good at that. I never was. Mine always landed on the top of the top. But they spin, and then pretty soon they start to wobble. The inside of the top is moving faster than the outside is. And as a result, if you're right dead center, you're not going around like this. You're spinning like a ballerina would, standing on one foot. So it's in a pit in the center of the earth. Okay, look at Ezekiel chapter 31. Ezekiel chapter 31, verses 14 through 18. To the end that none of all the trees by the water shall exalt themselves for their height, neither shoot up unto the tops among the thick boughs, neither their trees stand up in their height, all that drink water, for they are all delivered unto death to the nether parts of the earth, in the midst of the children of men with them that go down into the pit. So when a wicked man dies, his body goes into the grave, his soul and his spirit go into the pit. And they wait there until Judgment Day. That's where they're consigned until Judgment Day. So it's a temporary abode. Now, if the Lord were to decide to come back quickly, some people are going to be in there a lot longer than others. But, I mean, you think about it, the guys that, what was it, Cain that slew Abel? Cain's probably been down there for close to 6,000 years. He's probably close to done by now. Where someone that died yesterday just got down there yesterday. Ezekiel chapter 32, verse 17. Says, "It came to pass also in the 12th year, in the 15th day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, wail for the multitude of Egypt, and cast them down, even her, and the daughters of the famous nations, unto the nether parts of the earth, with them that go down into the pit." You see, again, we're pointing to that same place. Okay, now there's a couple of things that we want to look at. Oh, let's continue this. Continue reading. Whom dost thou pass in beauty? Go down, and be thou laid with the uncircumcised. Now, uncircumcised, you remember what that is, right? We're going to cover that in just a couple of minutes. It's not in this context. When we're talking about elect, non-elect people, we are not talking about physical circumcision, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. Okay, there's a different circumcision that God is concerned with. It's not just in the skin. There's a different type of circumcision that is concerned, that we're talking about here. So don't think that these are just guys that had the operation. When he says or didn't have it, that when he says uncircumcised, this is talking about people that are lost. That's the context of that. They shall fall in the midst of them that are slain by the sword. She is delivered to the sword. Draw her and all her multitudes. The strong among the mighty shall speak to him out of the midst of hell. Now, how do you speak out of the midst of hell if it's a grave? How do you talk out of the midst of hell if it's a grave? How do you talk out of the midst of hell if you're just simply annihilated? You can't. You can't. The strong among the mighty shall speak to him out of the midst of hell with them that help him. They are gone down, they lie uncircumcised, slain by the word. Asher is there, and all her company. His graves are about them, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, whose graves are set in the sides of the pit. That's an interesting point, huh? That there are graves in the side of the pit. In hell there are graves. Well, if in hell there are graves, then a grave can't be hell, because it's inside of hell. Whose graves are set in the sides of the pit, and her company is round about her grave. All of them slain, fallen by the sword, which caused the terror in the land of the living. There is Elam, and all her multitude round about her grave. All of them slain, fallen by the sword, which are gone down, uncircumcised, into the nether parts of the earth, which caused their terror in the land of the living. Yet have they borne their shame with them that go down into the pit. They have set her a bed in the midst of the slain with all her multitude. Her graves are round about him, all of them uncircumcised, slain by the sword. Though their terror was caused in the land of the living, yet have they borne their shame with them that go down to the pit. You see, we're talking about, if we continue all the way to verse 32, we will see nation after nation after nation after nation that are being cast into this pit. Turn to Psalm chapter 9. It's important to go through a few points on this passage. Psalm chapter 9 and verse 17. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forgot God. That should be a warning to some of the politicians in this country, shouldn't it? You want to know why we're having troubles? This nation forgot God. This nation that at one time stood strong and proud, and now we argue over simple little petty things that mean nothing to anybody, but it keeps everybody up in a ruckus so that they can do their dirty work in Washington, and we don't even see what they're doing. They just keep throwing smoke screens at us because they forgot God. You want to know why California's in the worst drought they've ever experienced? They forgot God. Try to find a true church in California. I dare you. Go out there and try to find. They're not easy to find. We lived there for a long time. We searched the state and we found two. Wasn't it two? One in south central Los Angeles and one in Lindsay, I think it was. Tiny little, there's more people in this room than there would have been in one of those churches. They forgot God. So God turns it back on them. So notice this, that the various nations that God forgot were turned into this pit. And that the pit, we read this a couple of times, it's in the nether parts of the earth. Somewhere down there. Its inhabitants can speak. You notice that, someone talking out of the midst of hell. They can speak. That means they're conscious. People that are unconscious don't speak. They're awake, they're conscious, they speak out of hell. That means they're in there. They weren't annihilated, they are there. It says its inhabitants are uncircumcised. I want you to turn to Romans chapter 2. Verse 28. For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. That word praise is the meaning of the word Judah. You remember when back in Genesis when Jacob's wives were having their sons, they would name them after something, and it would go on to say what that meant. And Judah means praise, and it is from Judah that we get the word Jew. That's where we get that from, okay? From the tribe of Judah, that's where you shorten it up and you end up with Jews. So now consider this again. He is a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit and not in the letter, whose praise, whose Jewishness, if you will, is not of men but of God. All of God's children are Jews in a spiritual sense. This point can spread out into so many different things. You see, every one of us in this room, if we're born again, you're a Jew. You're one of God's Jews. You remember over in Galatians that Paul referred to us as the Israel of God. We are the Jews. Hey, there's another reason that we can not celebrate Christmas, huh? Have to switch over and start doing Hanukkah, I guess. No, just kidding. But we are Jews. So yes, it is true that God has a lot of promises for the Jews that are yet to be fulfilled. Guess what, people? It's not talking about a piece of land over in the Middle East. It's talking about us. We are God's Jews. It's not a racial thing. It is a elect versus non-elect thing. So remember that. Let's take care of the Jews that we can find here that are God's children, instead of spending all of our money over to another place where, just because the real estate happens to say Jerusalem on it, it's not God's Jerusalem anymore. He was done with it a long time ago. Okay. Notice that it was mighty men that caused the terror in the land of the living, and that the land of the living are down there. And I already made this point that it has graves in the side. If there's graves in it, then the grave isn't hell. Okay? It says that its inhabitants bear shame. Let's look at some other descriptions of hell. Look at Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. That can't be the right. Oh, I'm sorry, 33. Christ is speaking here. Let's look at verse Let's look at verse 29 to get the context of this so we know who he's talking to. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because ye build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would have not been partaker with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them that killed the prophets. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers. How can ye escape the damnation of hell? Now, the people that he was talking to obviously weren't born again. Here they were trying to make the argument that had I been alive then, I wouldn't have killed any of the prophets. I'm that righteous. Well, they killed Christ. They didn't have any problem hanging him on a tree. And that's why he says, you bear witness to yourself. You are the children of your fathers. So we see that hell is a place of damnation. How shall ye escape the damnation of hell? So hell's a place of damnation. Look at 2 Peter chapter 2. Second Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. And spared not the old world, but saved Noah the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. Notice that this is a place of darkness, chains of darkness. Hell is dark. You know what dark is? Absence of light. Jesus is the light of the world. When you are in hell, you are completely and totally separated from God. Look at Jude verse 6, just before Revelation. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, under the judgment of the great day. It's going to be dark there. Luckily for us, hopefully we won't see it. We won't have to. But for a lot of people, it's going to be dark. They're going to be tormented. Look at Matthew chapter 5, where we find that hell is a place of unquenchable fire. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 22. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment, and whoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Notice the fire. Look at Mark chapter 9 and verse 43. Mark chapter 9 and verse 43 says, And if thy hand offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter into life maimed than having two hands to go into hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched. So it's a place of damnation, it's a place of darkness, it's a place of unquenchable fire. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 22. For a fire is kindled in mine anger, and shall burn under the lowest hell, and shall consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the foundations of the mountains. I'm going to have more to say about this in a minute, this idea of consumed. That's one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses will say, that if you're cast there, you're just consumed, you're just burned up. We're going to show that's not what that means, not at all. Look at Luke chapter 16. We talked a little bit about this last Sunday. And I said then, and I will say again, that I do not believe this to be a parable. I cannot find another parable where a man's name is mentioned. And it appears that those that Christ was talking to, the reason that he mentioned this man's name is because they knew him. Those people would have known him. It'd be like me mentioning someone that all of us know but haven't seen in a while, right? Mention their name, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Same type of a thing. So when Christ was teaching his apostles and he mentioned Lazarus' name, they understood who he was talking about. They knew who the man was. Luke 16, verse 22. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lift up his eyes. How many dead people you know that lift up their eyes? See, this isn't talking about the physical body. Physical body dies. Soul and spirit never do. They don't die. So the soul and spirit of this man's eyes lifted up his eyes. And in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. You know, I've given a lot of thought to this, and I can't definitely, I don't know if this is an actual fire, like the burning bush kind of fire. I don't know if it's just absolute pain, because when you're in absolute pain, it burns like you're in fire. Every one of us have had something go on in our lives that was physical in nature, that just felt like it would never end. I've been dealing with one of these, with this thing with my back. And I'll tell you, when it acts up, it hurts and it burns, you know. So I'm not really sure. Maybe it is fire, and since it's spirits, you don't burn a spirit up. I don't know. I can't tell you. It says fire, I'm going to buy fire. I'm going to go along with that. But I don't know the scientific what it actually will be, and I don't really ever want to know. I get enough of it here. I don't want any more anywhere else. This is not a case where I'm going to want to grab my ankles and say, thank you, sir, may I have another. This is something that I'd rather deal with here and be done. So it's a place of damnation, unquenchable fire and darkness. We see that the soul of the rich man was tormented in a flame. We have back over to Jude, verse 7. We looked at verse 6 a minute ago. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. This is something, eternity's, that's quite a while. You're going to be there a long time. The fact of, and now this is important, because the fact that there is a place called hell where people are conscious, where people are in torments with unquenchable eternal fire, argues the point that hell and the grave are not synonymous. There's no fire in a grave. We've never exhumed a body yet to find ashes. So if there's a place called hell where there's fire, and somebody tries to tell you it's a grave, ask them, well, where's the fire in the grave? Where's the torment in a grave? You have to be conscious in order to be tormented, don't you? Isn't that a requirement for it? If you're out, you don't feel anything anymore. In hell, you're awake. Your eyes are open. You feel it. It hurts. That can't be the grave. And we looked at this fact that it's a place of torment here back in Luke chapter 23 again, when we were talking about the rich man and Lazarus. Luke 16:23. And in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. Look at verse 28. The rich man wanted him to then send a missionary to his brothers so that they could be saved and not have to come here. Okay? Your normal Arminian answer to, if I can't be saved, well, at least save my brothers. Send somebody out there to save them. Look at verse 28. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham saith unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear him. Let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. You see. Okay, so now we're looking at this idea of torment. Torment is defined as an instrument of torture, hence the infliction of torture by such an instrument is a form of punishment, torture inflicted or suffered. The word translated torment in Luke 16:23 and 28 is the word basanos, and is a cognate of the word basagno, which is translated pain, toil, torment, loss, and vex. There's quite a few verses here. For the sake of time, I'm going to give you these verses and you can look them up at home. It would take us quite a while and we'd be stretching this out into another week, and I don't really have enough to do for another week. So here's the verses. You might want to write these down. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 6, Matthew 14:24, Mark 6:48, 2 Peter 2:8, Revelation 12:2, and Revelation 14:10. If you didn't get all of those, see me afterwards, and I'll give them to you. So now you can be like the Bereans and go home and search the Scriptures, whether those things were so. I think you will find that hell is definitely a place of torment. You will find that the inhabitants are conscious of their serving, whereas we were told over in Ecclesiastes there is no conscience in the grave. There's nothing to do in the grave. So don't try to tie these things together. The grave is a place that usually where you dig a hole and you put a body in it. And it's a physical body that no longer has a soul or a spirit. As they used to say in the old days when someone had died, they would say, well, the spirit's flown. They're gone. If you've seen dead people, they don't look the same. They have no spirit. They have no life. They have no soul. It's gone already. That was just a body that they were in for however long they lived here, and that's put into the grave. But the soul and the spirit are eternal. They're going to last from here on out forever. And they've got to go somewhere. They can't just flutter somewhere. There has to be a place for them, and this is the only place they can go. In Psalm chapter 18 and verse 5, Psalm 18 and verse 5, the sorrows of hell compassed me about, the snares of death prevented me. You see, there's sorrow in hell. It's a place of sorrow. It's a place of pain. Look at Psalms 116 and verse 3. The sorrows of death compassed me, and the pains of hell got hold upon me. I found trouble and sorrow. You're conscious. It's a place of anguish and pain. We're told in Job 26:6 that it's a place of destruction. That hell's a place of destruction. And also in Proverbs chapter 15. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 11 says, hell and destruction are before the Lord. How much more than the hearts of the children of men? In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28, it actually indicates that it's going to say something kind of odd here, that bodies can be destroyed in this manner also. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to both destroy both soul and body in hell. Okay. In Matthew 16:18, we're told that upon this rock, Jesus told Peter, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. You see, the hell is a place of destruction. The church will not be destroyed. Now, turn to Jonah, because Jonah's experience in the fish I'm not going to get through today anyway. Jonah's experience in the fish is interesting. And you say, do you really believe that Jonah was swallowed by a whale? I believe he was swallowed by some sort of gigantic fish and stayed there for 3 days and 3 nights until he started preaching sovereign grace doctrine, and the fish threw him up on the sand of the seashore. Even that couldn't handle it. Jonah chapter 2. Now we know the story of Jonah. We know that God had come to him and told him to go to Nineveh and preach to the Assyrians. This is before the northern kingdom had been captured by the Assyrians. The Assyrians were a pretty bloodthirsty group, and well known for the type of people that they were. Jonah didn't want to go there. You want me to go to the capital of our major enemy that's going to overrun us, and you want me to go preach there? So he took his eyes off of God and decided that he would fear man, the Assyrians, more than he would fear God, and tried to run away. Went and got on a boat to try to make passage somewhere to get out of town, thinking he could run away from God and get away from it. And get away with it. And in Jonah chapter 2, it says, Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly. And said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou hearest my voice. You see, Jonah's experience for 3 days and 3 nights was an experience not unlike someone being cast into hell. And that's what he's saying here. For thou hadst cast me into the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. Then I said, I am cast out of thy sight. Yet I will look again toward thy holy temple. The waters compassed me about even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down. I guess there's probably seaweed inside the belly of a whale or a great fish. You're down there with whatever else it ate, and however long it takes. Must take a while to digest if he came out after 3 days and was still there. But you know, the Bible says that God prepared a great fish to swallow him. So it wouldn't be unusual for God to prepare a whale that's only going to last 4 days. It's all the longer it has to be here to do its job. Might not have been any kind of normal acid inside the belly of this whale that would have eaten Jonah alive. You know, or eaten his flesh up. It's possible. God can do just about anything. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. So for 3 days and 3 nights, here he is in the belly of this whale, and he likens it to being in hell. Now notice let's compare this to some of the things that we've read about hell. He was there temporarily, right? Wasn't there permanently. He was there temporarily. Remember that hell is only there until such time as Christ returns. When he destroys this planet, that's the end of hell. Now the people that are in hell today will then be cast into a lake of fire later. But it's a temporary place, and that's where Jonah was. He was in a temporary place, but don't take that to mean that you're only going to be in hell for so long and then you get out and somehow go to heaven. There's a bunch of people that think that as well, that you only have to be there until you pay your penance, or you only have to be there until somebody lights enough candles for you, or you only have to be there for a while and then you'll get out. No, that's not what he's talking about. The temporary nature of it is that all of the wicked will be in hell temporarily. They're held there temporarily until Christ returns and destroys this planet, and on Judgment Day they're sent to the lake of fire. Okay? And that would be the end of hell. Notice he was submerged in judgment. Look at Psalm 88. Here he is, submerged inside the belly of a whale. And in Psalm chapter 88 and verse 7, we read, in the day of my trouble I will call upon thee, for thou wilt answer me. I'm sorry, wrong. Psalm 8, try reading 88, Jim. Psalm 88, 7. Thy wrath lieth hard upon me, and thou hast afflicted me with all thy waves. You see, submerged. If you've ever been under some form of extreme stress or pain or anguish, which feels like being in hell, do you not feel that you're just completely covered up by it? Completely submerged in it? That's what Jonah felt. That's what hell's going to feel like. And he went down to the depths of the earth. He felt, in Psalm chapter 77, now Jonah felt that this was not a temporary thing. He was afraid he was going to be down there forever. He thought he'd never get out. It ended up being temporary, but he didn't believe that at the time. And there's times when we go through trials and troubles in this life that we think this is going to go on forever too, but it won't. Bad times always pass. Psalm 77, verse 7 through 9. Will the Lord cast off forever? And will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy clean gone forever? Doth his promise fail for everyone or forevermore? You see, David had the same types of feelings when he would hit bottom, so to speak, when he would be at his lowest. This is a man that had been chased by his own children, trying to kill him, chased by the king before him, trying to kill him. Seemed like everywhere he turned, something bad showed up. Here he was a king of Israel, but didn't have an easy life. And there were times when he likened what he was going through at that very moment like he was in hell. And he was in torments. Every one of us has been in torments. Some mentally, some physically, some in one way or another. And when you're there, it's just like being in hell. So Jonah felt imprisoned forever. Hath God forgotten to be gracious? That he in anger shut up his tender mercies. You see, this was the way that Jonah felt too while he was in the belly of that fish. He felt that he'd be there forever, but he wasn't. Turn back over to Jonah. Let me show you something real quick. This is just a minor note, but I love this verse. I absolutely love this verse. Jonah chapter 2. Look at verse 7. We'll read 7 through 10. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came in unto thee, into thine holy temple. Here's a verse you might want to hang on to. They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. Remember that one. You observe lying vanities, something that's just worthless. You give a lot of attention to that, you forsake your own mercy. God's merciful to give you things, but you drift off into the wrong areas and you've just forsaken the mercy you could have had. They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. But I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. There you go. Salvation is of the Lord. Jonah finally got it right, figured it out. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. I love that. Okay, Proverbs chapter 27. Let's look at another point, because hell expands. It expands itself. It will never be full. Proverbs 27 and verse 30. Verse 20. Hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of men are never satisfied. You see, it never gets full. It will just continue to expand itself so that there's plenty of room down there. I mean, if you're going to drill all the way through and come out on the other side, there's a lot of room down there for hell to be located. And it can just continue to expand if need be, so that there's always plenty of room. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 14. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouths without measure, and their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. So it will never be full. And the inhabitants of hell, we've already looked at these verses in 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6 and 7, and we've already seen that the inhabitants there are reserved there until the day of judgment. So remember, it's temporary. What's coming isn't much better, but this one's temporary. And on the day of judgment, all the inhabitants of earth I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. The inhabitants of, they're reserved there until judgment. On the day of judgment, hell will give up the dead. Look at Revelation chapter 20. So you see, if someone were to say, well, you know, I can't agree that God would send someone to hell forever. He's not going to send people to hell forever. They're going to be there until Christ returns, and then they're going to have the opportunity to stand before God and be judged according to their works. It's very simple. And you know, most of them like that idea. They think they can pass muster. They think they can pass the test. Go talk to them. They believe they can earn their way into heaven by doing good works. That's what they believe. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Tons of them are out there. The difference is that God's children understand that they're not good enough to work their way into heaven. That they can't get there even if they wanted to. Even if there was a plan whereby they could work their way into heaven, you wouldn't be capable of doing it. I wouldn't. Adam couldn't even do it. He had the opportunity for eternal life in the Garden of Eden, and all he had to do was nothing. All you have to do is don't work at all. Don't do anything. Just sit here. Don't touch that tree, or don't eat from that tree. You can prune it, but don't eat it. That's all you got to do. Don't eat from that tree. It's poison. And he ate of it anyway. So, on the day of judgment, all of these people that have been held in this temporary holding facility called hell will come forward. They will now be resurrected back into a body, so now they're not just spirit and soul anymore. They're spirit, soul, and body, which is what we are right now sitting in this room. And at that point, they will have the opportunity for their day in court. They will face their accuser, and they will have the opportunity to lay their works out on the table to see if they're good enough to get into heaven. So it's not that they never had a chance. They have a chance. Live a perfect life. That's all you got to do. Piece of cake. Right? But then, you know, and if you think I'm kidding about the idea that they prefer this method of works, go try to share sovereign grace with them sometime. They don't want to have anything to do with it. Don't want to be around it. No, I prefer to work my way in. I prefer to do my works. You work today, Dusty? No? Okay. Okay, Revelation chapter 20 and verse 11. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it. And death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. See, now hell's delivered everyone up. And they were judged every man according to their works. You see, if you're not one of God's elect, you will have the opportunity for your day in court to face your accuser. And you will be judged based according to your works, which is exactly the way you want it. Verse 14, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Well, the logical delivery, or the end of that, if you follow it out, is that no man's works were good enough. They were judged by their works, but they weren't good enough, and they were cast in the lake of fire. Doesn't mean they didn't get the opportunity to present their case. They did, or they will have when that day comes. For the elect, on the other hand, we're judged according to Christ's works. We are in Christ. When God looks in our direction, on Judgment Day, he sees Christ. And we're covered by that. It's the blood of Christ that covers us from the same judgment of those that are going to testify according to their works. So on that day, hell itself will be cast into the lake of fire. It said that in verse 14. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. So hell's gone. Temporary. Only here until Judgment Day. In Revelation chapter 14 and verse 9, we see that the wicked shall continue to be tormented in unquenchable fire. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. The lake of fire isn't temporary. The lake of fire is forever. Now, I mentioned this idea of consume, that Jehovah's Witnesses and some others, the Worldwide Church of God, I think the Herbert W. Armstrong group, they take the position that you're just going to be consumed, you'll be annihilated, you'll just be consumed in the fire, and then that's it, you're done. So it's a temporary, you just burn up like a log in a fireplace, and then you're done. It's over with, torment's over, just there for a very short period of time. Okay, the word consume means to make away with, use up destructively, said chiefly of fire, to burn up, reduce to invisible products or to ashes, also of any similar destructive or devouring agent. Now, let's think of something real quick. It's not your physical body that goes to hell, right? It's your spirit. How do you burn up a spirit? You could burn up a body. They do it all the time. It's called cremation. How do you burn a spirit? Or a soul? How do you burn one of those up so that it consumes? How can you do that? Now, we looked at Revelation 14:9, and it clearly teaches that the wicked will experience conscious, eternal torment. There's no mistaking that. But let's look at this word consume, and let's see how the Bible uses this so that we can kind of figure out what they're talking about when it talks about consuming. Look at Psalm chapter 37. Psalm chapter 37. And verse 20. But the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of the Lord shall be as the fat of lambs. They shall consume unto smoke shall they consume away. This is the verse that they want to try to teach, that you're just cast into hell and you're consumed up, and that's it, you're done, gone. Look at Psalm 104:35. Psalm 104 and verse 35. Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, bless thee the Lord. Notice in this that the consummation that we're talking about, the being consumed that we're talking about, is talking about them being removed from us. Not being burnt up to where there's nothing of them left. It's to make away with. Remember, the word means to, in the primary meaning, to make away with, to go away. They are consumed. They're consumed away from the righteous. We won't have to deal with them anymore. But that does not mean that they will be burnt up instantly. We already saw that in Revelation, that won't happen. We're told in Matthew chapter 25, Matthew chapter 25 and verse 41 says, Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. This is a place that was prepared for the devil and his angels, but the wicked go there as well, into everlasting fire. How could you be? It wouldn't be everlasting fire if everybody was consumed. Fire would be there maybe, but nothing left. What would be the point of that? Revelation chapter 20 and verse 10. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever. Not consumed, not burnt up, not done away with. Matthew chapter 3 and verse 12. Whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat under the garner, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. And that is a parable dealing with the church, where there will be tares that grow up in the church. There'll be false brethren that grow up in the church. On Judgment Day, they'll be sent to the lake of fire, while the elect will not. I've already given you the definition of consumed. Look at Proverbs chapter 22. Proverbs chapter 2, 2 and 22. But the wicked shall be cut off from the earth, and the transgressors shall be rooted out of it. You see, the transgressors will be rooted out of it. They will be made away with. Look at Psalm 37:9. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. Look at verse 11. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves with the abundance of peace. And verse 22. For such be as blessed of him shall inherit the earth, and they that be cursed of him shall be cut off. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. Though he fall, he shall not utterly be cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with his hand. The picture that I'm trying to draw here is the fact that once this day comes, once judgment comes, the wicked will be gone. We won't see them ever again. They'll be consumed away. They'll be done away with. Look at Matthew 13. And we'll close on this point. Matthew chapter 13, verses 41 through 42. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Now I'll go into this a little bit more detail next week, so that you can see that this idea of the consumption of these people, they're being consumed, has nothing to do with the idea of being burned up and they're not here anymore. It means that they're taken out of our presence, that we're not here we don't have to see them anymore. Think about this, when that day comes, you won't have to worry about any of the stuff that you have to worry about down here. You won't have to be concerned with any evil, because it won't be present. It will all be taken away. And that's what we're dealing with that word. Now I'm going to dig into this a little more so next week, so that I can nail it down. I've given you kind of the hint. I'll wrap it up next week. But I do have too much to try to finish in the next couple of minutes. So with that, let's stand and sing the doxology, and we'll be dismissed with prayer, and we'll bring on the rest of it next week.